June 1991, little Sheree Beasley lived every child's biggest fear. She was taken. She was kidnapped by an evil, despicable man. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel where we talk about real crimes and real people. This is the disappearance and murder of Sheree Beasley. Want to know what happened? Let's get started. Sheree Beasley was born on February 25, 1985. She lived in South Road in Rosebud, Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. Sheree had been transferred several times between custody of her mother and grandparents, but at the time of her disappearance, she was staying with her mother. Sheree had two younger sisters. Her favorite colors were purple and pink. She attended Rosebud Primary School. She was in grade 1. Her mother described Sheree as very talkative, a lively girl. She was friendly. Sheree knew of stranger danger and to never speak to someone she didn't know. On June 29, 1991, Sheree was sent to the near milk bar by her mother to pick up some groceries. Carrie, Sheree's mother, handed Sheree money to pick up milk, a bottle of lemonade, meat pies, and some cigarettes. She also gave Sheree money to buy sweets for her. Sheree rode her pink bike. She was wearing a purple tracksuit, black shoes, and a pink helmet. Sheree never came back alive. A local resident discovered Sheree's abandoned pink bike and groceries. The man placed the bike against a nearby tree. Later on, a woman recognized the bike and contacted Carrie. Carrie then called the police to report Sheree missing. Initially, neighbors and the police thought Sheree had wandered off and she was going to show up. However, she never did. Authorities searched for Sheree all over. Everybody knew about Sheree's disappearance. Volunteers assisted in searching for Sheree. Carrie went on national television to make a plea. Exposing Sheree's disappearance all over would also mean fake information circulating in the news. Missing child flyers were handed out. Authorities displayed a mannequin wearing clothing matching those worn by Sheree. Carrie mentioned an incident that took place 2 months prior. Someone had attempted to abduct Sheree. She had been taken to school by a taxi. On the way home, a man approached her while she was cycling. Because of that, Sheree wasn't allowed to cycle home alone for a while. Authorities believed Sheree's disappearance was related to other abductions which had taken place in Melbourne over the past 3 years. Local families were afraid. Parents and students of Rosebud Primary School were offered counseling. As the time went by, Sheree's whereabouts were just simply unknown. A few months later, a young boy told investigators he had seen Sheree being forced into a small blue car by a man whom Sheree tried to fight off. The boy gave a description of the abductor. The police centered their attention on sex offenders. A month later, another witness came forward. She said she had seen Sheree and the kidnapper. Sheree was sitting on the front seat passenger, wearing a pink helmet. She was crying. The driver was a man, aged between 25 and 40, and clean-shaved. The witness took a long time to come forward because the media had mentioned Sheree's helmet had been found at the scene. So, the child she had seen crying and wearing a pink helmet was unrelated. The police resumed the search for Sheree. They released a sketch of the abductor in the car. They drew a list of people who drove the same car, and drivers were eliminated one by one. The state government and Crime Stoppers offered a reward for information. Later on, September 24th, a decomposed body was found in a drain at Red Hill, Victoria. The identification of the body was difficult because it was in an advanced state of decomposition. Then they decided to test the DNA of muscle tissue taken from the body and compare it to Carrie's blood and also to Shane Beasley, who was potentially Sheree's father. People believed the body belonged to Sheree Beasley, and in mid-October, the body was identified as Sheree Beasley, but they couldn't determine the cause of death. The case stalled until May 1993. A man was arrested regarding the abduction and death of Sheree Beasley. 56-year-old Robert Arthur Selb Lowe was charged with murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of false imprisonment. Robert Lowe was born in England, 1937. He attended boarding schools, both in England and in New Zealand. He was well-spoken and a well-respected salesman. He was liked and admired. Robert was a Presbyterian church elder, a junior cricket coach, and a Sunday school teacher. His godfather was the minister of Edinburgh's Presbyterian Church and the future chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II. Despite his appearances, Robert Lowe had a big criminal history. He was a pathological liar and an exhibitionist, a kidnapper, child abuser, and a murderer. In 1956, age 19, Robert stole a car in England. He tried to run down a policeman. He was fined £21. From 1959 to 1965, he was arrested and charged in New Zealand for indecent assault on a male and theft. He was simply fined. From 1959 to 1965, he was charged twice in New Zealand with willful and obscene exposure, for which he served 6 months in prison. 1964, the courts classified Robert as a rogue and a vagabond. He then moved to Australia. He married Lorraine and had 2 sons, Benjamin and Jonathan. Lorraine was brought up extremely religious. She escaped the exclusive Brethren at age 29. In 1970, she prayed for a friend for Christmas. After service, she met Robert, and she believed her prayers had been answered. Instead, Lorraine had met evil. Robert also had his run-ins with the law. He appeared in court facing charges of indecent behavior, loitering for sexual purposes, willful and obscene exposure, and theft. Robert had actually been on the police's radar early on. He was interviewed by the police after the abduction. They recorded Robert while in therapy without the therapist's knowledge at first. Robert had been in therapy for several years. His psychologist treated exhibitionists like Robert. During his sessions, his psychologist started getting suspicious Robert was involved in Sheree's disappearance and murder. Robert had expressed interest in the Chamberlain case, which had similar details as Sheree's: a missing child, missing clothes, religious background. His psychologist believed he had modeled off that case. After being approached by the police, when they told her they had recorded their sessions, she went against her ethical status to assist the police bring Robert to justice. Robert gave her a copy of his confession, which she eventually handed over to the police. The same day, Robert was caught stealing M&Ms with his copy of the document in his possession. In November 1993, there was a hearing. The boy who had witnessed the abduction testified. He stated he saw Sheree come out of the milk bar. A man pulled up and told her to stop and get in the car. Sheree said she didn't want to get into the car. The man took her off her bike and put her in his car. The boy went home and told his stepfather Sheree got kidnapped. Another witness, who was playing on the sidewalk, saw a girl in a blue car wearing a pink helmet. The girl seemed like she was screaming, trying to get her attention. Another witness stated she had seen a girl distressed wearing a pink helmet inside a car. When she told her husband about the girl, he told Sheree's helmet was found at the scene, so she assumed it wasn't Sheree. However, this detail had been wrongly stated by the media. Robert's wife Lorraine also testified. She stated that for the first time in 19 years of marriage, he washed his clothes on the night of Sheree's abduction and vacuumed his car the day afterwards. She was asked about Robert's whereabouts. She said he was at home with her. She later realized he had dropped off one of their sons at tennis. He attended a breakfast prayer meeting and then he was absent for the rest of the day. Lorraine stated Robert was obsessed with the abduction of Carmine Chan and the Chamberlain case. He kept newspapers clippings on the abduction of Carmine. Robert also had a negative view about the police. Lorraine also stated when Robert was brought in for questioning, he was crying and kept telling he was sorry. He claimed he was innocent and had nothing to do with Sheree's murder. Robert was charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of assault with a false imprisonment. Robert pled not guilty. Trial took place in October 1994. The prosecution stated initially Robert said he wasn't in the Rosebud area, but then he admitted he was. First, he denied his involvement. He then changed his story several times. Robert actually hypothesized what might have happened if he was involved. He stated he drove up and asked if she wanted a ride home. She said yes. She seemed upset and told him he was going the wrong way. She became even more upset while he couldn't get off the freeway and would have to drive a little further. He pulled up on the side of the road, tried to calm her down. She choked. He tried to help her. He panicked. He couldn't take her to the hospital because they would make questions, and Sheree died. He drove back to Arthur's Seat near Rosebud and laid Sheree in a filthy drain. This version of events were proven to be false. Another version was he picked her up after seeing her arguing with a young boy. He told this version to his therapist. During interviews, he said he was at home on June 29, 1991. He heard about Sheree's disappearance on the 6 p.m. news. He didn't remember what was on TV. He denied ever seeing Sheree, denied having a child on his blue Toyota, and wasn't aware someone had borrowed his car. Robert lied when he claimed he didn't know the area or the milk bar. However, he was well known there. The prosecution stated Robert was obsessed with child abduction cases. During trial, Robert's therapy sessions recordings were played. He considered pleading guilty to manslaughter to save his marriage. The sessions revealed Lorraine had said to Robert she wanted him to tell the truth. The therapist told him if he told the police, Lorraine would take him back. In May 1993, he was recorded telling a prisoner he had hidden Sheree's body in a drain. The defense stated Robert had abducted Sheree but hadn't murdered her. In fact, that recording of Robert is him saying Sheree's lips turned blue, there was no pulse. He said a prayer and put her in the drain. He carried her gently and tried to see if she would fit in, but it was tight. One prisoner testified Robert confessed he had abducted Sheree. Sheree's tracksuit was dumped in a rubbish bin at the Mountain Waverly Shopping Center. It was covered in sperm, but the tracksuit was never found. Another prisoner stated he confessed he had cleaned the driveway under the car after cleaning up Sheree's blood. He stated he had learned his lesson. He would use Valium with his next victim. Allegedly, Sheree choked while being forced to perform dirty acts. Robert's wife Lorraine testified again. She mentioned his obsession with the details of Carmine Chan murders. He claimed the police was going after good church-going people. He was obsessed with the Chamberlain case to the point of writing to Michael Chamberlain, who eventually wrote to Robert's psychologist and asked her to advise him not to write again. He tried to visit the Chamberlains while on a trip, but they weren't home. Lorraine also stated Robert had tears in his eyes as he apologized to their sons. When he returned home, he was pleased. Lorraine gave the investigators a list of places in the general Rosebud area she and Robert collected pine cones in January that year. One of those places was where Sheree's body was found. The defense contested the therapy sessions which were recorded on how they were obtained. The defense stated it was a violation of confidentiality policy. Court dismissed those claims, stating it was for the safety of the public. The therapist stated Robert discussed several details related to Sheree's murder, his desire to build an alibi, the consequences of pleading guilty to manslaughter, In April 1992, he stated he gave Sheree a ride and manually strangled her. In November 30th, 1994, Robert Lowe was found guilty of kidnapping, which he was sentenced to 15 years, and he also was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, never to be released. Later on, he recanted and stated he was innocent. He wrote he believed law enforcement used him as a scapegoat because they had failed catching who had done it. In 2010, it was discovered Robert was running a sex ring from inside prison. He had recruited people to smuggle in child pornography into the prison. He died in 2021. Robert Lowe was truly an evil monster.